I'm in the, I don't have any affiliation with rights and groups, but they focus on personal art. They don't have bookstores or some books. I guess they do But yeah, if you want to look on that, and look around, I'll answer any questions you got.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, he's gonna glad you're able to make it. Yeah, maybe you wouldn't really think it would. Okay, did you get it all?
Hi everyone, I'm Tudor Mitroy. I'm an artist. I'm part of Box 13 Art Space. I have a studio there. I teach at Sam Houston State University, and I've been friends with Howard for quite a few years. I guess if you're here, you know who Howard is. He's got a book out that you can see over there. He was on the cover of Texas Abstract. He's got work in the airport, museums across Texas. And we talk a lot about art, pretty much all the time. That's what we do, about his art, about mine, about everybody else's that we see, present and past. And then a few years ago, he asked me to curate a number of works on paper, and I did this in a big grid. Some of you may have seen it, you may have seen it at the time. I thought it was a very interesting installation that sort of combined his constant motion, I guess, and action in a bunch of little sort of sparkling 78 pieces in a grid. And Donna, who's here next to me, is a Houston-based art writer, editor. She's a contributor to Arts and Culture, Glassdyer visual art source. For 40 years, she's been writing about art on many local publications, national publications. She wrote essays to catalogs. She did a very nice review of one of my shows a few years ago. She has most recently written a catalog for Harry Asen. The show is scheduled for October at the Museum of South Texas. She has a Bachelor's of Art in Art History from University of Rochester, and an MA in Art History from University of New Mexico. So these are tonight's speakers. Howard wanted me to say a few things about the installation. I mean, he was involved in it. He was here with me, and all the decisions were made in agreement. And I think it looks great the way it is. The main idea was to put work together that essentially belongs to three bodies of work: the large canvases, the small works on paper that are almost like an ongoing process and activity, more like a sketchbook, and then the larger pieces on paper, which I think kind of could be grouped in, it just occurred to me that these might be large interiors, those might be the portraits, and those are the objects, the large pieces on paper. So I guess I'll let them start the dialogue. Thank you.
The Romanian rocket, Tudor Mitroy. Here's Donna Tennant.
Thank you. Well, in 2018, Howard and I did a Q&A for the Visual Arts Alliance. It was at the Printing Museum. I guess Tudor was there. I don't know, Henry maybe. At the time, Howard was living in New York, where he had a studio in Spanish Harlem. We talked quite a bit about that at the time. Well, he returned to Houston in December of 2019, just before COVID hit.
New Year's Day 2020.
Wow.
Yeah.
Moved into a studio in the Heights. And so we've been talking about doing another conversation for couple years now. And when he had the opportunity to rent this space for a month, 5 weeks or whatever, it seemed like a good time to do it. So Howard's shown in New York, Texas, California, Berlin, Florida, Spain, India, and Peru. And I think Tudor mentioned he has a painting on display at Bush Intercontinental Airport. He got his MFA from the University of North Texas in 2006, and at that time he decided to focus on his work and not take any side jobs, which he's managed to do, and we all know that's not easy. So kudos to him, right?
Nervous head twitch.
So last fall, this beautiful monograph was published. It has an interview with David Cohen and essays by Alex Bacon and Andrea Carnes. Now, while in New York, Howard met David Cohen. He's a writer and publisher of Art Critical magazine, as well as Alex Bacon, who is also a critic. He's based in London. And then Andrea is the chief curator at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth. So I thought maybe we could start by Howard telling us how this book came about.
Well, like this last-minute pop-up exhibition that we're sitting in, I have a very generous collector who agreed to fund the book, and that's probably the main thing, and that helped a lot. But I don't know, the idea of a book seemed to present itself. I started thinking about it right around the same time as my friend Marcella McNeil was thinking about her book, and she's an artist who used to live here. She moved to Dallas, I guess 5 or 6 years ago now. Mine took a little longer to come out for various reasons, but that's something we talked about. I might even talked about it with Bob a little bit, our friend Bob back there. Anyway, so I started thinking about it, seemed like it was an appropriate time. And then everything kind of lined up right around the same time. I started talking. I'd been put together with a book. I don't know if she calls herself an editor, but she writes book proposals to help pitch to book publishers. Really? And so I had kind of a wish list right around the time I got the funding, and these were 3 of the top people on my list, and they all said yes, right as the funding, the collector said yes for the funding, and the book publishers, who actually at a lot of particular moments, their dance card's pretty full, so it's never really just about having the money. You know what I mean? But they'd already worked with Alex Bacon and David Cohen on other projects. They knew them from the New York art world. And that actually warmed the whole thing up right away. And they also knew Michael Opping, the ex-head curator at the Fort Worth Modern.
Oh, okay.
And so actually they suggested approaching him, and he was familiar with my work, but he was actually in the midst of 2 other book projects since he'd retired. And then he suggested Andrea Carnes, and she said yes, and I knew her. I'd actually interviewed her for an art history class when I was a graduate student at UNT. So it all just kind of lined up. It was right around the same time. I mean, there wasn't, that's how some things are sometimes. It wasn't like step 1, step 2, step 3. I kind of had this wish list, and actually I had the wish list and I paid for the pitch. Then once all that stuff was lined up, I asked the collector for the funding. I think that's how it went. But now we're dipping back into 4 years ago. Anyway, the bottom line is it was one of those, I guess there was some serendipity involved. I was really fortunate. I don't think it would have been possible a couple of years earlier for all kinds of reasons, which we talk about it another if we want. But I hope I answered your question. I kind of, after a little bit of a espresso cold brew, I'm kind of bouncing all over the place.
Well, I know that you said while you were in New York, you worked hard painting, but you also went out a lot. You went to openings. You met you met people, you met critics.
Yes, I should say that while I was living there, you know, it was wild. A really brief synopsis of my time there. There wasn't a day wasted. I was on the go all the time. I'd get up, I'd go to my studio, I'd take the 6 up to my studio. I had an apartment in the East Village, and the studio was in Spanish Harlem. So I'd take the 6 up, go to the studio, work for a while in the studio, and then I'd leave, and I'd probably either go to, on almost any given night of the week, an art opening or a lecture or the how I met Alex Bacon and David Cohen was at the art critical review panels once a month, and they'd have other sporadic events throughout the month. And so I spent a lot of time with art critics, and these 2 particular ones who wrote for the book, they'd come and done studio visits, and I'd gotten to know them a little bit over the course of the 3 years I was there. So that's really, that's sort of how it was. It was, you know, living there and meeting them, and it reactivated an interest in art criticism in me. I've read a lot of art criticism since then. So, and that's something I hadn't done a lot of since graduate school. So the sort of intellectual side of me sort of got a little bit reawoken by the experience too.
Yeah, I think, you know, any artist, mid-career artist like Howard should be, you know, kind of working on a book, you know, kind of thinking about a book, something that, you know, will live on. Anyway, okay.
By the way, the one other thing I should mention is, not to go on too much about this, but there was an art history book focused on Texas-based artists that came out about 8 years ago. It's on the back, a beat-up studio copy is on the table back there, where you can also buy books that I'll sign and also prints, but whatever.
Yeah, he got the cover of that, which was
so that helped. That helped
great.
as part of this whole process too. Yeah. That wasn't my book, but the cover of that, all of that it all adds up. I think one thing not to go off on a tangent, but you know, the Hollywood story is, there's that Hollywood story where you get a big break. I'm not the king of big breaks. It's all little cracks, little steps, you know, along the way that happen due to like daily grinding away at it for the most part.
Yeah, I think when we did the talk for the Visual Arts Alliance, the VAA, you know, it was an audience of artists. So they were kind of like, Howard's like, there's no magic bullet, you know, it's just like work every day, and just do what you can. But okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about the work. As you can see, he creates these large-scale paintings. Some are on stretch canvases. Others are push-pin to the wall. They're paper. He does small drawings constructed from painted paper. And all of the paintings and drawings in the show are from the last 2 years, except for this one, which is called Guidelines for an Aha Moment. And it was done in 2010. So, and if you look at these paintings, you'll see, you want to hold that? Yeah, this book has fabulous plates too, really large, gorgeous plates. So if you look at his paintings, there are a lot of different elements. Geometric abstraction, dripping and swirling paint, cartoonish figures, areas of trompe-l'oeil, collage, and spray paint. You know, you can, even back then in 2010. So Howard, can you talk about the work and maybe some recent developments, maybe the spray paint and all this whole movement into collage?
Sure. And the book sort of breaks it up that way as you just articulated. So I wanted to include, and we're gonna pull some other ones out that aren't part of the installation in a minute, but I wanted to include some work from the book in the show. And the show kind of came together at the last minute, as I might have mentioned before, but I wanted to sort of tie it into the book, which is sort of the thing right now. And I wanted to include work from the book that's a little bit older. So this one's from 2010, and then have a little bit of a conversation between the older work and the newer work. And so back then, for a little while, I was literally kind of tagging the work, marking the work with spray paint, and I was sort of a little more I don't know, self-conscious back then. There was a review or something where I got lumped in with a lot of graffiti writers at the time, and I'm friends with them. I've lived in the same studios as them, but I'd recently come out of this pretty rigorous, intellectually rigorous graduate program with Vernon Fisher and a bunch of other really great professors, and I felt like I was doing something a little bit with a little bit more heft than that. So after that blurb, I don't know if it was in the Chronicle or the Dallas Morning News, or I don't remember where it was, but I got self-conscious about it, and I stopped using spray paint altogether for a very, very long time. So fast forward from 2010 to like 2022, 2023, 2024, and I found a way back to the spray paint after thinking about it, trying to digest a new way to use it for quite some time. And actually, now that I think about it, I also remember being at the Nasher Sculpture Center with Marcelin, Marcelin McNeil, who I'd mentioned earlier, and there was a big, beautiful spray-painted sterling ruby, sort of atmospheric painting there, which felt like in line with like Rothko and all these sort of atmospheric things that were non-objective. And so it took me a while to digest that, but I finally got to a point a couple of years ago where, okay, the way back in with spray paint is for me to take pieces of paper and canvas, spray paint them, and then cut them up and collage that back into the work. And what I realized right away was it created a new ingredient in my recipe, which was essentially this atmospheric, this sort of atmospheric quality in the work. And then we're going to show we're going to pull out a couple and just lean them against the walls. Then a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, they're in the back. Yeah. I did a show out in Marfa about a year and a half ago, and I included work that had this sort of same new device in them. And a couple artist friends made a couple of other, I keep saying a couple, but they made other observations, which is not only is it atmospheric, or like the night sky or clouds, there's also this weird reference, unintended reference to black and white photography. I also had never seen any work quite like that. I hadn't seen anyone use it quite like that before, which is actually something that's very, very important to me, because I know the work's quoting a lot of 1950s abstract expressionism and 80s neo-expressionism, and even color field painting and this pink splash from the 70s behind you, Donna. And so I was trying to kind of like, I just sort of realized, oh, I haven't seen this twist on things before, and that was really important to me. And I'm still getting a lot of mileage out of it. And you can see it in some of the smaller ones, and obviously a lot of the larger ones. I'm not doing it in every single thing I'm doing right now, but I'm doing it in a lot of them. And so that's sort of one of the goals of the show, is to compare and contrast the way I'm using things literally 14 years ago versus now. And yeah.
So you were asked to do a talk on John Chamberlain, a John Chamberlain piece at the
at the
Menil
Menil,
collection.
yeah.
So Howard went out to Marfa to see the John Chamberlain installation, museum, whatever it is. And so you said that after that, your paintings became more sculptural, messy, raw, tactile, with the cutting and tearing. So was that kind of like a turning point? When was that?
That was sort of 2012, 2013, 2014, and they're pulling out 2014 painting, which is one of the first examples of when I did that. The timing of this is perfect. This is so nice.
There you go.
I know. I'm never going to hear the end of this. I'm schlepping your paintings around. I essentially there's a section of the book called Assemblage, and I essentially did a bunch of large-scale pieces that had very sculptural surfaces on them. Some of the surfaces protruded 8, 10, 12
But we should
inches.
say John Chamberlain uses old car parts.
Crushed automobile parts,
to
and they're
build
big,
huge sculptures.
giant
Yeah,
sculptures, standalone sculptures.
Right.
They're
not like
when you
this.
see him, you'll know him. He's very famous, and there's a comparative illustration from the John Chamberlain Museum in Marfa that talks about them. And anyway, so I went through a period 2012, 2013 where I did a lot of these. I did these large scale. They hung like tapestries, but the surfaces got very sculptural, sort of referencing Chamberlain indirectly. But I used paper. I used soft materials, unlike his harsh metal crushed sculptures. I was using like paper and then later canvas, and they were hanging off grommets like tapestries. And then this was one of the first examples where I brought it back to sort of a stretched canvas, which has, as Tudor would say, a little more of a formal feel. And so, yeah, and there's also periods, and you can see examples in the book, I don't have any here, where I would cut out passages of unresolved paintings which had a lot of information on them and collage them back into the work too. It just sort of depends, but it was pretty short-lived as far as you know, how I went through that phase pretty quickly as far as things getting very three-dimensional,
Right.
tactile, off the wall, and then you can still see it in the newer work, but I'm not as interested in getting this big sculptural surface. And
When you were an undergraduate at UT Austin, you were doing a daily comic strip for the school newspaper, and so that influence lives on in the work. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I think it's important never to lose your sense of humor, even
Yeah.
if it's sort of indirect. Life can be really, really tough and difficult, and so you gotta be able to laugh. And I think that it's something I've carried over from the days of doing the daily comic strip. There's a lot of things I carried over. I mean, some of the work, it's a little less direct, but there's something playful and whimsical going on in everything, even if you don't literally see some sort of cartoonish figurative reference somewhere. And that's really important to me. And that's probably sometimes I think that's where some of the color palette comes from too. To me, it's playful or humorous to use like hot pink or tangerine, or sometimes I would use turquoise or these bright yellows. I think I've said this a lot before, but I think if all the work was black and white, cold steel blue, or fire engine red, it'd be a little too much, because the work, I think, is made in a pretty physical, aggressive way. So one way or another, I'm trying to hold on to that humor that I started out doing the comic strips. The other things, too, that were important from those days was I was on a daily deadline, and so that taught me kind of a discipline that I've sort of carried over into the 21st century, and then there was a real economy to the writing and drawing that would happen. I mean, you'd make these comic strips, and they'd be reduced down to the size of a postage stamp. So you had to be very economical with your line work. And all of that stuff, I still carry it in this work. And there is I'm not claiming it's funny, but there's a comic strip from the 90s in the book too.
Yeah. So that was political. It was
I did some editorial cartoons too, but I did a daily comic strip that wasn't really necessarily political. I was a big fan of like Bloom County, Outland, Burke Breathids, Calvin and Hobbes. I mean, that was sort of my goal, was to sort of, you know, I was going to go that direction, and I had a point in the late 90s where I even thought about getting into maybe comedy writing or stand-up comedy or something like that, and I thought I'd meet more girls and make more money doing this. And that's not really how it all worked out.
Well, so
It seems sexy to be an artist in the art world.
Yeah, right. So Andrea Carnes said that many of your paintings are anchored by a cryptic figure, and that seems to be embattled and disrupted by outside sources. So I see figures in most of your work. Is that come from the? I don't know. Is that the figuration is obviously
Yeah, I mean,
important.
I've always carried that over. And again, to be honest, at this point, I feel confident to share another insecurity along with the tagging thing. After the cover of that book, there were a couple, I'd be bumping into people calling me the abstract guy and listing off a few other Texas artists that everyone knows about. And I didn't necessarily like being pigeonholed that way. And at the time, I guess I was still a little insecure. I don't know where. I probably made a more conscientious choice to be a little more deliberate about being object-oriented and figurative, and that's sort of there. I don't like to sit too comfortably in one camp or the other. And at this point now, I'm at a point where I just don't care that much. Whatever you're going to tag it with, you know, if it's your marketing language or whatever, I don't care anymore. In the end, I just want to make things that I'm proud of, that just look good, whether you find a figure in them or an object in them, or they're a little more all over abstraction. Thank you. And so, yeah, they're pulling out one more but these are two more recent ones from the Marfa show that kind of tie into the dialogue today. And I figured, I mean, I don't think you're going to confuse Vanna White with Tudor Matroy, but he's doing a hell of a job nonetheless. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
So as far as,
I'm never going to hear the end of that one.
okay, stop using the table.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Okay.
sorry.
Oh, okay, good. So from what I understand, and I've been to your studio, and there's, usually you have several large paintings going on, and you have the drawings going on, maybe in a separate room?
Same room.
So, okay.
Separate wall, same room.
So kind of talk a little bit about how you, will you work on like 2 paintings at once, and then take a break and do drawings, or, how do you do that?
Sometimes that's how it goes. It depends on how far along I am in a particular piece, but I generally keep smaller works on paper, let's call them drawings, going while I'm working on paintings. Maybe 2 paintings at the same time, maybe 3. If I have too many things going on at the same time, it makes me crazy. I'm very impatient, and I generally tend to be able to finish the smaller. First of all, everything takes a lifetime to make. I should say that. Everyone wants to quantify, especially collectors, they want to quantify how much time someone makes and equate it to a price, which is ridiculous. But they all take a lifetime to make. But generally the compositions are a little more distilled in the smaller works just because of the size for me. And I'm able to work through them quicker, which I find very pacifying to start and finish things. There's a sense of accomplishment for that with me, and I can be kind of impatient that way. And so the larger things, anything larger generally takes quite a bit longer, but I'll do both at the same time. And there can be a whole wall of small ones or a couple of larger works on paper going while I've got a couple of paintings going. That's usually about it. You're never going to see 10 things at once. Maybe little drawings, but and sometimes those take a while too. Generally, there's a lot of the work might look kind of spontaneous and physical and impulsive and emotional, but there's a lot of time being very analytical and thoughtful and sitting and staring and thinking. And then I'll get up and do something, but I don't physically work in a tedious way. It would make me crazy, but I do end up with things that I think are very thoughtfully composed, and everything ends up being very intentional, even when it looks very accidental and spontaneous. I mean, that's part of the key, the editing, right? Knowing when to leave something alone.
Yeah, knowing when to stop. So, there are some artists who don't title their work, or they'll title them with numbers, but Howard has very creative titles. If you've looked at those, I think one of these is lurching and cursing in a field of tulips. That's that one.
That's in the book too. Yeah.
And this, let's see, House of Derelict Pleasures. Back there, the house halved open for the world to see. And let's see what else we got here. The Virtues of Graceful Penmanship. Toy cities invented for consumption. I mean, they're very creative. So you want to address how you come up with the titles, how they relate to the work or don't relate to the work?
I keep a running list of titles. Sometimes the work prompts us a very specific title at the beginning or after I'm finished with it. Other times I feel like there's something neutral enough about the work where I can apply a certain title. Sometimes I can just go through the list. I'm like, that doesn't fit with what I'm working on, and I find something else. But yeah, this probably comes from the days of joke writing and doing the comic strip. I read a lot. I get titles from things that I'm reading that prompt things. Sometimes Lurching and Cursing in the Field of Tulips is pretty close to something I read in Blood Meridian, which was a Cormac McCarthy novel, very famous Cormac McCarthy novel. So that's where I think Lurching and Cursing were the words I'd have to dig it up. I took a phrase from that and maybe changed an adjective here or there. Sometimes song lyrics certain song lyrics will come up that I'm listening to while I'm listening to music in the studio, and those prompt ideas. Lately, I mean, I probably should start pulling over while I'm driving to write things down that I'm listening to in a podcast. You know, a lot of art criticism, Peter Sheldall actually, he writes so wonderfully and creatively. He's a famous art critic from the New Yorker who just passed away not too long ago. And I get all kinds of prompts. It's mostly prompts from the reading, and then I sort of spin off that. And, you know, a lot of times I'm just trying to make up, it's like with the artwork, I'm trying to like make up something that's gonna stick and hold your attention. And sometimes they're very sophomoric or humorous titles, and sometimes they're very philosophical titles. You know, sometimes I can't, it like totally fits with the work, of course. Other times it's like, well, that'll work on that because that's neutral enough in its depiction to get away with that. But yeah, you know,
Yeah.
and I went through a phase when I was much younger thinking that I was leading the witness, so to speak, with a specific title with my work. Like I'm saying too much and putting an idea in their head. And then I realized, you know what, I'm having so much fun with this as a creative writing exercise. I don't give a crap. And but then people with my work, they end up coming up with their own thing regardless of the title or not. It seems like I've been approached on multiple occasions at a show or wherever, and I actually start to explain my work to somebody. I've even had this happen where they're like, no, that's not what it's about. Like, okay, whatever. I like your description better than mine, you know? You want to make it? I'll split the 50-50, you know?
Well, there are also words, numbers. I can see this, Ronnie, which I think refers to Ronnie McMurtry.
Yeah, it did. I used to
Who's
try and
former
tweak her.
dealer.
She retired. My old
Yeah, she
gallerist.
was a great dealer. And then, you know, words you kind of can't read, and then like these arrows, which Andrea Carnes said were phallic devices.
Well, everyone sees something different, and that's cool too. I mean, I've had because this probably stems from the comic strip days. I have a real interest in language. I probably have an underserved interest in language, which a couple of artist friends have mentioned on occasion a lot in recent years. And I have an ongoing sort of text and email thread with like Bob and Tudor and Mark, some other artists and stuff. And, you know, so I like the idea of stream of conscious thought slipping into the work. And I'm the first one to admit that like we all think in language, even visual artists. Everyone thinks in language, probably primarily and first and foremost, you know. And so I've always sort of held on to it. They're random notes sometimes, they're stream of conscious thoughts. They have nothing to do with the work, they have everything to do with the work. It always seems to sort of slip back into work at various times. I saw a great, I was at the preview at the Manil Drawing Institute for their Works on Paper show on Thursday night, and there was a Barbara Roussan Gordeau, I'm getting her name wrong, but she's got handwriting much like Twombly, which is Cy Twombly, which is another comparative illustration of my book. But she turned it into, like Twombly's in some instances, just this sort of scrawl that you could tell was handwriting, but she turned it into art. And there's a term for that. It starts with an S, and I can't think of it. Semantic?
Semantics.
I don't know if it's semantics or not, but I've had a long-standing interest in that, and I don't know if I'm ever going to extrapolate that anymore, if it's going to continue on sort of like this stuff here. But in newer work, I'll doodle into it with little, you could read, there might be some text in that, I don't know, you know, but in that newer one there. But yeah, so again, I didn't mean to ramble because we're talking about rambling, but.
Also, you know, teeth. I see teeth.
Yeah.
And that one, but that, you know, those are a little older. And then when my sister came in, she looked at these, she said, oh, I see a bird. No, I see 3 birds. Yeah, I mean, you know, so with the beaks or whatever.
Sure, I mean, those smaller ones, they're pretty, I mean, you can see portraiture in them for sure. Yeah. And I could see how people might see a nose or a beak or what have you, but they're left, I'm using that, especially in those, and a lot of other work too, I'm using that as a springboard device to do other kinds of studies, interests, exercises in color and texture and mark making and, the use of, I don't even know if collage is the best term for it, but the use of collage is just another mark making device coming straight out of how Matisse uses scissors to make works on paper, that sort of leads into, the collage thing leads into another very brief but important discussion topic. But yeah, birds, faces, something celestial, cyclops, minotaur, whatever. I'm trying to lead you in a direction, but not spell it out for you. It's just sort of a baseline springboard that you can sort of jump off into your own place from. I mean, if you want to name them all your cousins, there's Susie, Fred, Jimmy. Unofficially title them that. Hey, I'm not going to fight with you about it, But yeah, so.
But I feel like the dripping, like there's always dripping going on, and that, of course, is kind of like a nod to abstract expressionism. Which
sure, but I have to say, like this newer one is a really good example. There was dripping going on, then I cut it up and I rotate it 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and I don't want to get off on this sort of postmodern context, but it's what the minute you rotate things and you put them back together, you start to say something different that goes against all that Greenbergian sort of nod to the artist as the sort of subconscious conduit of a spiritual higher power. So when I'm remixing and repurposing those things, it starts to, there's other artists who've come before me in the last 10 or 20 years who've done things like that too. But when you start to do that in the work, that starts to take the work to a different place and a different sort of conversation about, what it means to make a mark and repurpose the Holy Grail drip from from Pollock or de Kooning days, and that's an important part of the conversation with me that I think has actually been very, very overlooked, but very hard fought and very important in my work because, again, going back to that book and the Ipping Art History book, I like to think that I'm pushing things, I'm making things that couldn't have been made, I'm making things in 2024. I'm taking these histories and quoting them and repurposing them in a way that you couldn't have made that painting 20, 30 years ago quite like that. You may not like what I'm making, but you definitely wouldn't have seen it 20, 30 years ago or 50 years ago, And that's been like an ongoing, I've been having that argument internally since I was in graduate school. And it's a very important argument that's not always resolved, but I'd like to think I get good results from it, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I feel like I got something important off my chest there because it never gets written about or talked about.
No, I was going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Like, that you kind of resist, obviously, I think when I first saw your work, I said, oh, abstract expressionism, and, Henry hates those isms more than anything. So, and I know artists don't like them. You don't want to be pigeonholed. So, yeah, but I think it helps you to kind of react against something.
Absolutely. And that's sort of the point of art. I'm not here to placate and make pretty pictures that are just pleasant and soothing. I do want a reaction. And, I had some, and if everyone likes what you're doing, I think you're doing something wrong, you want some people to like it. Thankfully, I've had enough people like it that I'm not sleeping under the freeway or anything, but...
a chance to say a few last things before we take some questions, some kind of like maturing, how you've matured and, how your work has grown. And over the past, graduate school was 20 years ago?
Yeah, 18 years since I got done.
Ago.
I think in some ways I've changed the same as we had said before. I think maybe indirectly there's still something playful or humorous going on with the work, which is really important to me. And, I think formally things have gotten a little bit more distilled, and I think there's still this sort of assertive, loud aggressiveness to the work, but things aren't quite as busy as they were. Things are some of this newer work, and essentially the much newer stuff, like I'd alluded to, is things where you see bits of black and white collage or collage like that one that I'm pointing to right now, spray paint collaged in. Things have gotten a little more distilled, and there's more neutrals in the more recent work. Ironically, they still feel more colorful. I was making things, and there's a couple of examples in the book earlier on that were incredibly polychromatic, and now they're less so. So that's a major change. And also, in spite of what some people might think, if there's one thing that's changed, because you said the word matured, I think as a human being and an artist, I think I've matured and become incredibly grateful to the people who've been supportive, and there have been a few, and not that I wasn't before. I was just so busy trying to just make things and whatever, preoccupied with all kinds of foolish things that younger men get preoccupied with. Now, probably, if there's something that's changed since these earlier years we were alluding to, it's just this sort of just gratitude and realizing, like, and maybe a sense of satisfaction to a certain, not that I'm complacent in any way, about just being still being here, you know, and
You're
hanging
still
on.
neurotic and caffeinated?
And still neurotic and caffeinated, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe a little better looking too,
Yeah.
you know.
Questions?
How do you decide that a work is complete?
I like the Robert Rauschenberg answer. How do you know when you're done making love? But that's a lot of artists have used that answer. I mean, you know, for me, a lot of it is formal concerns regarding composition and use of color, line, form. I'm constantly trying to subvert myself, and it's very easy to make something that looks pleasant and nice. And there's one or two things I could do to these that would make them a little less peculiar, that I think would actually, there's a whole ocean of people in every major city that would love that, and they'd probably sell really great, you know. And we all have seen that sort of work before, but not that they don't sell, they still find that. I'm just saying, but like, so yeah, it's not usually with one way I know is it's just formally sort of resolved, not doesn't feel labored to me, doesn't feel overworked, doesn't feel undercooked. A lot of times I'll share things that are pretty far along with a couple other artists, and if those two people are pointing out the same concern, then, you know, I hope that answered your question. It's a hard question to answer, but it's easier now than as I've moved on and gone on to sort of figure out when things are resolved than when I was a younger artist, and that just comes from work, you know. It's like exercise in a sense. You get stronger the more you lift weights. Yeah, Susan.
Could you talk about the color pink?
I've used hot pink in the work forever. I find it funny, playful. I guess it's in Western culture. I can't speak for Eastern culture. In Western culture, I think you think of it as sort of feminine. And I might have said this earlier on, I'm constantly trying. I know the work's made in a pretty aggressive physical way, and there's going to be a ton of people the first thing they're going to think of is macho man abstract expressionism, and there is that ingredient in the recipe. It's not the only ingredient, which is what we were talking about before, but I'm always trying to subvert those things with playful, humorous color palettes like hot pink or canary yellow or turquoise or tangerine. Sometimes that's maybe not so much in this show, but you can find it in the work somewhere. So that's sort of where the pink and other similar colors sort of come from. And I use new colors all the time, but there's certain colors that have been threaded through my work for many years now, and hot pink would be one of them. And I find it kind of funny and playful and unexpected. I'm glad we're talking about it again, because if I did a lot of stuff, like I was saying before, that was all black and white or fire engine red, cold steel blue, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll get to a point where I do that, but right now it feels like it would be too much, you know? I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe y'all don't think the work's made in such an aggressive way, but I've heard that before, and it feels like that. So I'm trying to do more than just do that in the work. And hot pink helps. Bob?
So on Instagram, when it just doesn't really do justice to the work that you see and hear.
Well, if I want people to show up, sometimes that's the way you're going to reach them. I don't, not everyone checks their email like you, Bob. Which, that's all. I don't know if he's a good friend, and he doesn't want to see it on Instagram, and he doesn't always check his email because he's inundated with email. So how do you call everyone now?
Well, people used to get crowds before Instagram. I mean,
They mailed out postcards. But I also, in my own defense, I knew I was going to do this show less than a week before I did the show because it was a pop-up exhibition in an empty gallery space. And a lot of people don't want more mail now, and that's environmentally unfriendly. So I can't win no matter what.
So I guess the question is really just, could you talk about people looking at art on their phone generally?
I think looking at art on your phone, and I've said this all the time, I think looking at art on your phone is like listening to music underwater, and I think it's very, very unfortunate that there are way too many people, not just young people, old people, middle-aged people, that they make assumptions based on what they're seeing on their phone. And I have to say it's a double-edged sword, because as much as I think that sucks. In fact, I actually had someone the other day, Carolina and I we were looking, that painting had been wrapped in plastic, and she, we were talking about what it looked like, and then we took the plastic off, and her first thing she said was, "Oh my God, it looks so different than before the plastic was on, even clear plastic." You have to live with the work, and you have to see the work in person to get the full effect. That's part of it. But having said that, I'll say, I'm working with a gallery in Berlin now. They found me on Instagram, So I've sold things through my people going to my website. So it's a double-edged sword. I like to think that it's a prompt to get people to go look at things in person. And once in a while, I'll post on Instagram, or I'll do a quote I send out an email message, and hopefully y'all will get on my email list. There's a sign-up sheet back there. But I'll from time to time mention go see things in person. I think looking at things on your phone is kind of a lie. But I don't really have a better solution at this point in order to pique people's interest. And I just sort of hope that they'll take the time it'll prompt them to go look in person, And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
I have no choice.
I can't think of a better way. I'm just sort of, I could go underground and not do anything, and I'm not sure that would work,
Mm-mm.
Was Vernon Fisher influenced?
Yeah, big time. There's a comparative illustration in the book, and he was my major professor in graduate school, and I think I was talking with somebody about this earlier. A lot of times you have a professor, and they're very influential, and you end up, just generally speaking, your work ends up mimicking theirs. And I think the sign of a good professor is when the work doesn't. This is the closest thing. I wanted to include this as a nod to him. Although he wasn't the first person to use the blackboard as a device, his blackboard paintings are classic, and there's a comparative illustration of one of those in the book. But he was tremendously influential in the sense that one of the smartest people I'd ever met, and it was my first experience with a real true intellectual, incredibly well-read visual artist. Not that I'd met a bunch of dummies who'd been hit on the side of the head with a 2x4 before that, but I'd never had that level of deep diving discussion before I got to his class. And I soaked up, I remember everything in those classes. I have notebooks somewhere because I would take notes, but just the idea of that as the intellectual component of things and was incredibly important. And although he was a calm, cool, collected customer as a human being, and his work was kind of like that too, and I'm clearly the opposite. That's just not me. But I did take that from him in a very broad sense. I have his patience in the sense that I can look at the work and think about it, but as far as what I produce and how I make what I make, I can't make things like that. I just don't have the, I'm just too emotional and impatient. And I try and use I don't think of me telling you I'm emotional and impatient, I don't think of those as criticisms. I actually think they're maybe my superpower for me, but not for everyone else, you know. And I try and use those to my benefit. I mean, for a lot of people that they say that those are negatives, but I see them as positives in my work, you know. Yeah, I went off on a little tangent there again regarding that, but the other faculty there were really great too, you know. So, one more question and call it a day. Anyone? Good. Okay. Well,
All right.
Are we good?
Yeah, it's about an hour.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. There's water, wine, beer back there, and I'll be here I'll be here to sign books. And thank you to everyone who helped out. Thanks. So what was your question?